ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Mark Blunden and this is The Leader. It's not good financial news, I'm afraid, with data released by the Office for National Statistics showing the UK economy shrank by 0.3% in August, meaning we're on the brink of a recession. ONS figures also showed that GDP, that's a measure of the size and health of a country's economy, fell more sharply than had been predicted. While the majority of experts expected a flat August, news of the 0.3% shrinkage follows growth of just 0.1% in July. It comes after Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey warned its emergency intervention to shore up UK debt will end on Friday, leading to even bigger worries about pension funds, which are significant holders of UK government debt and index-linked bonds. But now Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg is pointing the finger at the Bank of England for the whole sorry situation. He was on BBC Breakfast trying to deflect blame away from Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget.
I think that the mini-budget was not the most important factor within this. I think the interest rate differential is a more fundamental point because that is more clearly an investment point, and that the scale of the mini-budget can get overblown as a percentage of GDP.
All these toxic ingredients made for a particularly fractious Prime Minister's questions as PM Liz Truss faced a Labour leader, Keir Starmer, at the dispatch box.
Everyone can see what has happened. The Tories went on a borrowing spree, sending mortgage rates through the roof. They are skyrocketing by £500 a month.
What we will make sure is that over the medium term, the debt is falling. But we will do that not by cutting public spending, but by making sure we spend public money well.
So what kind of mess are we in? How are people battening down the hatches? And is there any way out? To help us navigate the economic small print and the challenges ahead, we're joined by the Evening Standard's business editor Jonathan Prynne. Jonathan, what are you reporting on Wednesday?
Well, Mark, we've got another fairly tumultuous day in the markets. A lot of confusion about what the Bank of England are planning towards the gilt market next week. So as a result, gilt prices have fallen quite heavily again today, which pushes up the yields on gilts, which is basically the interest rate that the government has to pay in order to be able to sell its debt.
What's the context of the UK economy shrinking by 0.3% in August?
Well, manufacturing fell quite heavily. Parts of the service sector as well, services sector, which is the biggest part of the economy, also saw big falls. I think the overall number, 0.3%, was unexpected. People were expecting the economy to kind of flatline during the month. And it means that the third quarter of the year, which is the June to September quarter, will almost certainly be negative. And of course, it's two negative quarters on the trot that constitute a recession.
Could you break down what the issue is with the pension funds and how come these are suddenly on the economic front line?
Well, it turns out there was a bit of a time bomb built into these a lot of these pension funds, which kind of exploded in the aftermath of the Chancellor's mini-budget on the 23rd of September, which triggered a big fall in sterling and in gilts. And some of these pension funds suddenly found themselves having to sell off assets, gilts in particular, almost in a fire sale scenario. And it more or less brought the entire gilts market to a grinding halt, and that had very, very dire implications for the funding of some pension funds. So the Bank of England was pretty much forced to intervene to stop the gilt market from bunging up, because the knock-on effect for pension funds was looking pretty, and indeed the entire financial system was looking fairly horrendous.
Is there a possibility the bank's emergency support package could continue after Friday?
Well, I think there's always a never say never aspect to it, but the bank's been very clear twice now, once in a speech from Andrew Bailey last night, and again in a formal statement this morning, that it will end on the 14th, on Friday. And so to go against that is going to really undermine the bank's credibility.
And poor old Jacob Rees-Mogg's been complaining about his mortgage increase. Do you agree with his suggestion that our current economic woes were more down to the Bank of England not moving fast enough on interest rates and the strength of the dollar rather than the Chancellor's mini-budget?
It's a slightly desperate attempt to shuffle the blame elsewhere. But I mean, the big picture is what's ultimately driving all this is that the world's capital markets are very, very worried about the government's ability to fund its deficit. And the deficit is only set to widen with all the help that's going to householders, and rightly so, to cover their energy bills. But there were some really big unexpected tax cuts, or some of them were unexpected, in the mini budget. And the markets are just not persuaded that the government has a plan, a credible plan, to close the deficit and to put the government finances on an even keel in the medium to longer term. There just is no confidence in that at all, not helped by the fact that there were no OBR forecasts to go with the mini budget. They are now going to publish them at the end of October, but it was going to be November, but there was another U-turn. So what's driving it ultimately is a lack of confidence in government economic policy.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up, how Londoners are preparing for a bleak economic winter. Why not hit rate and follow in the meantime? Jonathan, what are some of the negotiations going on behind the scenes between the Treasury and the Bank of England?
The Treasury and the Bank of England have not been working together in the way that they should have been. And there's a tension there that is very worrying. It's a bit like when number 10 and number 11 aren't speaking with one voice, when the Treasury and the old lady of Threadneedle Street are not in lockstep, then that really worries the markets and undermines Britain's economic credibility. So I'm sure they are talking to try and get the message unified and consistent, but at the moment the markets are hearing different noises from the Bank of England from the Treasury, a lot of blame and buck passing like Jacob Rees-Mogg was attempting this morning. It's not a pretty picture.
What's your take on the viability of so-called Trussonomics as a fiscal doctrine?
Well, supply-side reforms, which is what the Prime Minister is sort of banking the farm on, are great in theory, and they can deliver increases in productivity and growth and all that sort of thing. But they're not a quick fix. We haven't really had a clear, broad brush kind of overview of what the supply side reforms under Liz Truss might look like. I gather there's more announcements due later, probably next month, I think, on freeing up the supply side and trying to get Britain's growth motoring again. But those are long-term fixes, take a long time generally to feed through into the real economy. In the meantime, we've got a recession on the way, inflation, interest rates rising pretty rapidly, energy bills, mortgage bills, all going the wrong way, and, long winter ahead of us. So I think that in the short to medium term, the growth agenda is going to be incredibly hard to achieve and probably won't be achieved. In fact, the economy will go south probably for the next year and a half. Beyond that, who knows? But it won't come in time for the next general election. I think that's a fair bet.
How do you assess the situation that we face compared to what happened in 2008?
Every financial crisis, every recession is different, has its different causes and different characteristics. I think on the plus side, the Bank of England, particularly under Mark Carney, did some really, really good work after the financial crisis and in stress testing and bolstering the defences of Britain's financial system and Britain's banking system in particular. So we're unlikely to have the same kind of near-death experience that we had with the entire banking system back in 2008. So that's on the plus side. I think on the minus side, the public finances have just sort of got worse and worse and worse. And I think personal finances and the financial position of households is looking much worse than it was in 2008. And I think it'll really start to unravel over the winter. I think the one good thing we've got that we've had for a long time actually is unemployment is still very, very low. Unemployment's been low for many, many years now, really since the last global financial crisis, with the exception of the blip of the pandemic. But that's good. That's good. It means people that they'll feel the pain, but at least they will be able to afford to pay the mortgage while they're in work, hopefully. It's when unemployment starts to rise that I think we really need to worry.
And I suppose most importantly, on the ground, do you have any thoughts on how people should be preparing for any future recession?
I think people, they don't need advice from me in a way, because people are very good. We're already starting to see it in in the shops, in selling patterns in the shops, how people are starting to adjust, trade down to cheaper items, fresh for frozen, wonky fruits that are a bit cheaper, all those sorts of things. We had good figures today from Poundland. People can see what's coming and they're adjusting their lifestyles, they're adjusting their spending habits accordingly. And most people will muddle through so long as they stay in work. Most people will be able to change their spending patterns, cut back here and there. It won't be much fun, but they'll muddle through. But, for the bottom 10%, 20%, I don't know, maybe the ones who are most vulnerable, least financially resilient, particularly the ones who lose their jobs and stay out of work for a long time, it's going to be really, really tough. And they're the ones that obviously the government needs to focus on in any help.
There's more on this story in the Evening Standard newspaper and online at standard.co.uk. That's The Leader. We're back tomorrow at 4 p.m.